Wanted to get the background of estimating and quoting with both of you as far as how it started, where it was a decade ago, and how far it's come.
Manufacturing can be a science, but quoting and estimating is an art. There's not a one-size-fits-all on that.
You know, I've said it plenty of times. I mean, I think that the automated quoting software is one of the most revolutionary things to happen to sheet metal fabricating. It's fascinating.
Welcome to the Next-Gen Metal Fab podcast. I'm your host, Tim Heston. In each episode, I'll be joined by a rotation of co-hosts, Caleb Chamberlain from Oshkosh, Cody Lee from Everyday Technologies, and Lance Thrailkill from All Metals Fabricating. Together, we'll talk about what the future could look like for precision sheet metal and tube fabrication.
Hey, Cody Lee of Everyday Technologies here. Before we get back to the episode, I just wanted to say a quick word about what I believe is the industry's leading quoting and collaboration software, Paperless Parts. It helps my shop and hundreds more across North America simplify every step of the quoting process in one secure platform. With patented technology and automated costing logic built around how we work, we're able to turn RFQs quickly and accurately. It's easy to train new team members, and with ERP integration, we avoid rework after winning a job. It gives us better visibility into our pipeline and margins and helps us deliver a fast, more polished experience to our customer. And beyond the software, the Paperless Parts team has been a true partner, responsive, and genuinely invested in our success. Visit paperlessparts.com to see why we rely on it every day.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the Next-Gen Metal Fab podcast. And this time I'm joined by Cody Lee at Everyday Technologies. How you doing, Cody?
Pretty good, thanks.
And Lance Thrailkill down at All Metals Fabricating. How you doing today, Lance?
Great. Thank you, Tim.
And just kind of wanted to get the up-to-date picture of what it's like on the ground floor of metal fabrication, considering all the changes we've seen in the national headlines. But just kind of, so Lance, just kind of bring me through how's business? Have you seen any major changes, or it's business as usual? What's going on?
Well, just to recap, we had a big influx of business in Q4, which is not normal. Usually Q4 is slower, generally speaking, for fabricating. So we had a big freeze in January. So we've been playing catch up all year. We're finally almost caught up. The front half of the shop is finally caught up, and the back half should be caught up in the next week or two. Thank God, finally. So it's been a long, grueling last few months, but we're on track to have our best year ever. So it's going good. Yeah, very good.
All right, Cody, how are things on your end?
Kind of similar to Lance there. We had our traditional slowdown in Q4, but we've recently got a new customer, a couple customers, but one in particular that takes the lion's shares of the growth. And yeah, we've been kind of in the same boat. We've their forecasts kind of hit us out of nowhere and started to ramp up pretty quick in December into January. And it's kind of been this perpetual trying to keep up with them. So yeah, first 3 months of the year have been very, very busy. Just like Lance said, our front half of our building's actually caught up as well. And it's really just getting through our capacity, and weld and paint has been the big challenge. But nonetheless, we're as well on track to have a record year since I've been at Everyday. So a lot of exciting stuff, but got a lot of work to do yet.
In the coming months, in the magazine as well as online, we'll be diving deep into quoting, estimating, and costing, which is kind of what I kind of want to talk about today, because it's always been an intriguing topic to me, because I've talked to various fabricators and quoting, estimating software platforms. Kind of wanted to get the background of estimating and quoting with both of you as far as, how it started, where it was a decade ago, and how far it's come. So Cody, kind of bring me through your story, because again, you're coming to this business in your 20s, and kind of buying a legacy business. And yeah, so just kind of give me that story as far as the state of estimating when you arrived, and then kind of bring us through to today.
Coming into the business, they had an antiquated ERP system that didn't have a lot of information that was in it. A lot of the quoting at the time was done kind of quote unquote on a napkin, and the work center costing and kind of some of the costing logic behind it was very not well defined or thought through. So coming into it, I didn't obviously have a ton of experience in sheet metal. let alone quoting sheet metal. So for me, it was about trying to make sense of, all the direct cost inputs that go into creating a quote. And so I would say within the first year, myself and a couple of the other team members sat down and kind of created a homegrown spreadsheet that went through everything of, calculating bill of materials, through processing or the different processing steps, as well as the kind of background costing for the work center rates that we ultimately derived, so we could have a true understanding of, what our costs are, what our margin is, et cetera. And we use that for probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, with me being in the business, and it served us pretty well. We would iterate upon it every year, every few months, depending on kind of what's going on in our business. But nonetheless, worked for us. And then, about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years into being in the business, we ended up going with a new ERP system called Plex that we've talked about before. And so through that, that system required a lot more information, some that, maybe most shops are accustomed to having into their ERP system, but we kind of came from really just having, no bill of materials, no inventory, no accounting, none of those things into our old ERP. So with that, we were now finding ourselves to say, hey, we've got to take this information we've put into a quote. And if we get awarded the parts, we've got to then, you know, redundantly put that information into Plex, which is not a very quick process. So through that, we ultimately went with a quoting software, paperless parts. And really the pain point that it solved was not so much the quoting, although those are some great features that we've been able to take advantage of. But really just the transfer of data or the information of the parts as we get awarded jobs quickly. So at the time, I was really kind of faced with, do we need to hire another engineer to basically be full-time dedicated into getting information into our ERP system as we get awarded work, et cetera, to not have to do that and basically allocate those dollars to this quoting software that was able to quickly, in a matter of seconds, push that information into our ERP system.
All right, all right. And one thing that I've always, and I want to delve into this, I'm going to riff on this, but I've always been I've been fascinated with activity-based costing, but on the other hand, I've also talked to other sources, theory of constraint practitioners, time-based accounting practitioners that kind of say, listen, cash is going out of the business whether the machine is running or not. In fact, the machine running is not making you money; it's actually costing you money. And there's all sorts of activity, uh, how much, how granular you get into costing versus how much of a waste that is, because, well, if it's a new job, then it's not going to be accurate anyway. So there's all these back and forth debates that I've had with a lot of folks in this industry, and we'll riff on that in this hour, I'm sure. But Lance, kind of bring me through your story as far as how your quoting has evolved in the past, decade or so of your business.
Since I've been here, we had an ERP system job boss since early 90s. And so when I got here, all the quotes, you'd build the job, you'd build the quote as if you were building a job. Each account manager would, disseminate the drawing and, calculate stretch out and different things like that. And build the job, which was actually a quote. And so differently than the challenge that Cody was solving for, we were actually doing that work on the front end. So because of how time consuming that would be, you want to be very selective in what you're quoting, right? Because and there, these somebody asks you to do like a budgetary quote. It's like, we're either going to quote it like we're going to win it, or we're not going to quote it at all. And it was a large time investment. And then we had and also required a very experienced estimator. Um, and I remember talking with Cody early on in their journey. That's a big challenge, right? It's like finding these people that know how to, catch the lookouts, right? Like the things about the part that are gonna make you lose money on it that you might not catch just at first glance. And so, yeah, it was. And the other aspect about that is depending on who the risk tolerance for the estimator is depending on what price the customer would get, which would drive me crazy because I obviously, as a business owner, have a very high risk tolerance. And when you got a bunch of high detail people, oftentimes those people do not have a high risk tolerance, and so your estimators would not be aggressive enough. So they'll be padding the job to make sure we make enough money. They get it, they give everybody enough time, not make anybody mad on the floor, not making ownership mad, and not making enough money. And so they'd be too conservative with their estimates, give people too much time or put too much margin on it. And so it was like, depending on who you had quoting it, was you get a different price from every estimator at All Metals, and it quite frankly drove me nuts. And then the scale, it was just the ability to scale would be difficult because you'd have to find somebody that is so well trained. And then we joined the paperless parts. I think it was in 2020 or 2021. It was right before. I guess it was 2021 was when the material pricing skyrocketed, and which was amazing timing for us. Thank God for that, because we were having to requote every job we do. So meanwhile, we were also having a record year. And so it was this, if we would not have implemented paperless parts, there's no way that we would have been able to do what we did, because we were so busy requoting every job constantly throughout the year as, material pricing was going up and up and up. And that took so much time. So with all the new business, automating that process through paperless parts and standardizing it, that's a big element of it, is like it forces you to standardize it. Now, different estimators can still override different things and make, put a little bit more cushion in there, so to speak. But overall, that's a big benefit of that, is it standardizes the process. And so, I've said it plenty of times. I mean, I think that the automated quoting software is one of the most revolutionary things to happen to sheet metal fabricating. It's fascinating, and the ability to look for manufacturing issues, and programming that into the software to help you catch those things, so you don't have to have senior estimator. And we have somebody that doesn't even really know sheet metal and get the parts like 80% of the way there, and then the senior estimator reviewing it, put the final touches on it. And so that's and it's only going to improve more and more with AI, and everything Jason and them are doing over there is pretty fascinating. So yeah, that's our journey, and it's been fun. It's been cool to watch, and it's really exciting, honestly.
So you mentioned, all right, catching air places where, all right, these could be money losers for us. These are the variabilities that we may not predict. So what are those manufacturing details? And then ideally you catch them, and then they're not a variable anymore. In other words, all right, this is something we have a hard time controlling. This is an unknowable in this drawing. But now, how do we make that knowable? By keep doing it and go, okay, no, now we know how to cost this. Now we know how to price this for different markets. So kind of bring me through that journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's designed for manufacturability. So, I mean, like some examples would be, a hole too close to a bend line where it's going to pull, not being able to get to, hardware installation, or a piece of hardware being too close to a bend line, um, a through hole being now lasers with fiber. This is not as much of an issue, but it used to be a larger issue, was, having through holes being smaller than the thickness of the material. And so that, that now makes it a machined part. Once again, it's not as relevant anymore, but it still has some relevance.
And one that we've caught a few times is just like, do you have enough tonnage from a press brake standpoint, depending on the length and thickness of the material? Calls
Mhm.
out different variables like that for us.
Yeah, or if a bend can even be done, right?
Right.
How to attack a bend.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's all about establishing guardrails, right? So, all right, you establish the rails where this is your funnel of sweet spot work that you know you can do, and then anything that falls outside that, you catch it before you even quote it, and say, all right, and now this is going to provide an issue, and then go from there. I
And
had con-
tolerancing too, by the way, GD&T tolerancing, and things like that, just unrealistic tolerances. People throwing machining tolerances on sheet metal parts. And GD&T is one that gets you in. That's not a fun one to get got on.
Yep.
Right. And also, do you have any kind of reviews as far as contracts, as far as supplier audits and all that kind of things, where especially when you've got amazing opportunity with a large customer, but then there are all these costs as far as the cost of quality, the cost of audits, the cost of to make sure that you comply with everything that potential customer requires. So kind of talk me through that.
Cody's had a fun run with that lately. I'll let him answer that one.
Yeah. No, we definitely deal with that kind of stuff. I mean, we've probably in the last 12 months had 4 or 5 supplier quality audits, whether that be onboarding a new customer or just, an annual touch base with our customer. But as far as capturing the cost of that stuff, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if I've got a general line item there that captures that specifically. Um, obviously it takes overhead, specifically people and systems, to make sure that you're in a position to be able to, do those things with those customers. So a lot of that's kind of captured in our uh, I'll say our work center costing model, from an overhead standpoint. And also maybe just, I tend to do the last look, especially on larger projects or strategic customers, from a margin tolerance standpoint, ease of business to do customer or to work with the customers. You've got some that are just a bunch of different steps you have to go through, and others it's just quote, here's your price, go. They don't even require a PPAP. So it just kind of depends on what the situation is.
Right. So there's a whole range of different costs to work into, but you guys were mentioning too that you recently went into a deep dive with your work center costing. So kind of bring me through that as far as how you establish the costing of different work centers and how you apply that to different kinds of work.
Yeah. Before we jump in, that I do want to add, like I was teasing Cody. We were both going through the same thing, but on our quote, we actually have a line where it's like, "Do you want a first article?" Like you got to choose yes or no. And so the whole purpose of that is to flag it's because buyers are notorious for being like, "Oh, by the way, halfway through production, I need a first article." It's like, well, that's extra money and that we didn't have in the job. And so the really key is understanding on a job to job basis what's going to be required. And I think the upfront audits and things like that is just some part of the cost of doing business. But anyways, yeah, let's dive into. Go ahead, Cody. But then we
Yeah,
can
I was
dive.
just say, I mean, that's actually a good point. I guess whenever Tim asked about, yeah, how do you approach that from like the cost of doing business with some of these things that are extracurriculars for some customers? We do the same thing, Lance. I mean, every one of our customers pretty much, there are a few exceptions, but pretty much every one of them require a PPAP, right? Um, and I've actually had some strong conversations with 1 or 2 customers where our standard is, okay, hey, you've got an EAU of 1,000 pieces, and we're going to give you a minimum order quantity of 100 and based our price cost off of that. But I know most customers are going to want a 3-piece or a 5-piece PPAP sample. Well, my production price might be $100 per part, and yeah, I'm going to give you a piece price for 5-piece sample, which obviously there's less spread there in terms of setups and all that stuff. But I throw in, we've got a set rate for what we call programming time, which kind of captures the programming of the part. Our internal quality manager on the back end, doing all the PPAP documentation, and we'll play with those numbers depending on what the expectation from the customer is on that. Because some of the stuff we were just having a conversation the other day. He, our internal quality guy that does all of our PPAPs has been with our company for 30 years, and he remembers the day where it was just FAIs, maybe a bubble drawing, just calling out different dimensional data, to where today it's like we've got all these different OEMs that have some different variation of spreadsheets and requirements and control plans and all these things that we have to present to them. And that'll take hours per part. And if you're PPAPing, a package of parts that's 20 piece or 20 individual part numbers, that's going to take him potentially weeks, depending on the level of information that they're requiring. So we do capture it there, but it's in the PPAP price.
That's a huge point with PPAPs too. With the and I talked to one shop owner years ago about not only PPAPs of first articles, but any low quantity job. Where he was talking with a customer, kind of this goes back to basics where it's like, all right, well, time is money. Why, if it's time is money, then a small job, isn't a small quantity less time, so it should be less money, right? That was
He
his.
obviously, yeah.
I
I would say
yes,
that guy doesn't know much about sheet metal or quoting
right.
manufacturing in general.
Right. Well, no, he was just doing a thought experiment, and it was like, all right, it's like, all right, yeah. So why? Because it's money in, money out of the business. It only takes you this long. It's like, yeah, but what that PPAP does have, and what that low quantity job does have is an incredible opportunity cost. Because
Yep.
then if you set up this machine for their small job, then you can't set up this. Then the big job waiting in the corner is not being produced. And so you have an opportunity cost to put this ahead of the line versus if you want a low quantity job in many weeks, well, hey, we can squeeze it in among other work. And so the opportunity costs are lower. But there's all these, all this debate as far as, hey, what does this really cost you? But well, it's okay. Guess what? This paperwork costs money. And another comment I wanted to add too is I've been talking with some shops that have been implementing different AI, be it Claude or anything else, where they're looking at all this documentation and trying to streamline that. I'm wondering if y'all have kind of delved into that as far as these different requirements. You look in the contracts, AI gets you 80% of theirs, so that then your quality manager can go, okay, I can do the last 20%.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that
Go
is
ahead.
very interesting. I would say there's definitely opportunities there. We've not done it though.
I mean, any document longer than one page that anybody sends me, I throw it into AI summary. I'm not reading anything longer than a
Yeah.
page.
That's
But
right. That's right.
but
Yeah. Well,
I haven't figured out how to do that. We're looking into a lot. I actually just had a demo yesterday with somebody. He asked me to keep it stealth. He's kind of under the radar. He's done 3 shops so far, but it was fascinating. It's what I'm trying to build on our own. But it's a large language model that integrates into your Outlook, into your ERP system, into everything. And for example, like a PO comes in to your account manager, it scans the ERP system to see if this is a repeat job, and if it is, then it goes ahead and the agentic AI enters the jobs automatically. He had another agentic tool that did it scanned all their payables and their payable contracts constantly once a week to look for pay discounts, and then it would issue the payments and also update the QuickBooks to reflect that. So pretty fascinating what he's building there, and it's the possibilities are endless. And so I hadn't thought about it from a quality standpoint. That's really intriguing and interesting. But we're about to see, our whole worlds are about to change, and I'm really excited about it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the comments I've gotten from the stories I'm working on thus far is, it's an amazing, amazing potential, but just wait till the lawyers look at it.
Yeah.
Where like, who you gonna blame for missing a whatever, if it's AI looking at that. So that it's certainly there's certainly challenges ahead. But yeah, getting back to to costing and to how you establish work center rates, just to kind of establish a baseline. So again, I've talked to, I talked to so many, a full range of shops. Some shops where the bidding is basically throw a price out there. The others is just fully granular activity-based costing. Every forklift move, there's a line item. Cody, kind of bring me through where you sit within that spectrum as far as how granular you get with your cost tracking.
Yeah, like Lance said, him and I have had some pretty detailed conversations around this, and I quite frankly have had it with numerous people, and everybody's kind of got a different flavor on it. Someone told me once that like manufacturing can be a science, but quoting and estimating is an art. And basically, what that means is there's not a one size fits all on that. It's about what you know about your business and how you apply that to your costing structure, your costing logic. But to answer the question, I've heard shops that just say, "Hey, we've got a X dollar an hour shop rate," right? And they apply that across the board, which is the inverse of activity-based costing. So from our standpoint, just high level, generally speaking, I would think that you would be charging more an hour for a laser that cost $1 million versus maybe a pen machine that costs $8,000 or $12,000 or something like that. And so that's the logic that we take to sit here and say that I've gotten a CPA involved and had us comb through every detail and get it down to an exact science, I'd be lying. But we do apply that kind of logic to it, in that you can pretty like objectively determine like what your labor rate is an hour. And on the labor specifically, we consider a couple things like inefficiencies. So like a 50-minute hour versus a full 60-minute hour. We consider obviously some percentage of overtime, as well as the actual fully burdened rate it costs for that operator in that particular work center. And then you've got the cost of the equipment. So there's a couple different ways that you can figure that out. But for us, we kind of use like a depreciation model. So, you're going to have this, piece of equipment for $100,000. It's got a shelf life of 7 years. So you can kind of divide that out by the available hours or theoretical hours that you intend to sell on that to kind of get a cost of equipment. And then depending on what that is, you can add consumables and different things like that to it to cover that front. And then the third component to it would be the overhead portion of it. And this is one that I've heard a billion different ways to approach. For us, I just try to keep it as simple as possible. But we have a good idea what our overhead is on a yearly basis. So a lot of our fixed costs and things like that, like rent, etc. So really just kind of determining what that is from a dollar perspective, and then I just divide it into how many sellable man hours that we have in a given year based on what our head count is, not necessarily like what our available like laser hours capacity and all that stuff, to kind of get it down to a dollar value. Um, and then Lance, I'm drawing a blank. I can't remember what the fourth input was, if there was one. I got labor, cost of equipment and consumables, overhead.
Profit? No, maintenance, for maintenance. Did you?
Yeah, maintenance, which we kind of group into the cost of equipment. We've just got it broken down different ways. But if those, at least those three things are considered. And so, for example, if you've got a, you're welding something, right? You've got the cost of the operator, you've got the cost of the equipment, you've got the cost of overhead, and you say it's going to take 1 hour to weld this part. So you're going to get that work center rate for that. And then once we do all those things, kind of establish those processes. Of course, there's the cost of material on top of that, right? So I'm just thinking about how we quote a part in paperless as an example. We determine what our material cost is going to be, any hardware or different ancillary purchase items like that. But once all those things are done and all those direct inputs are costed out, then we start having the conversation of what's our margin look like on the whole part. And even individually, like we've got, different markups, which there's a difference between margin and markup, but different markups on our material, on our purchase components, different things like that. And then ultimately, what margin do we want to put on the whole job? I've had conversations, like I said, with others in the industry. I was talking to a stamping manufacturer a couple years ago, and they sent me their quoting spreadsheet. And the amount of information that was on that quoting spreadsheet and the amount of different just things in it, I was just like, this is like worse than any cost breakdown that customers asked me to do. This is insane. And I think that derives from their customers, especially if it's like automotive, I don't have experience in it, but my understanding is that like, in automotive, they'll ask you to do cost breakdowns on a program that's going to last several years, right? For a new model or whatever. Then they get down to some of the tiniest detail about what's your overhead rate for this piece of equipment and I don't know, just all these different cost points. And they had that all baked into their spreadsheet. I'm like, dude, it would take you 2 hours to quote one part just to fill all that in. So I mean, relative to them, I felt like it was pretty straightforward, but I guess a far cry from the guy that says I charge $60 an hour for my shop rate.
Yeah, it's and when you get into that kind of open book quoting where they demand to see everything, that's classic case of commoditization. The classic definition of commodity is, all right, if I can duplicate if costs are very transparent and I can duplicate those costs in another facility and produce something similar, you've just commoditized your product.
Yeah, I mean, I'm either competitive or I'm not, and if I'm not, let me know and we'll talk about it.
Right. And 'cause speaking of competitiveness, so how does bid win rates fit into this whole equation? Maybe Lance, if you have some comments on that, as far as, all right, this is how many we're winning in this area. Are we pricing strategically, and are our costs in line to make this a sustainable business?
Yeah, I think, man, I'd have to look up our latest win rates on new business. I think it's in the 30-40%, generally for like everything across the board as they're blended together. It's closer to 70%. I mean, most of our repeat quotes are, 100% win rate.
Right.
So it gets a little bit convoluted there, but yeah, I think generally speaking, our new business, like off the street type of opportunities in the 30%, which is I think pretty good. And it can vary month to month, and maybe 51 and 50, yeah, 1 month and 30% the next. But that's kind of generally speaking. And we had the way we used to do it was we had, our laser rates, our punching rates, and then the rest was a shop rate. And so um, and then we just would start to bump up margin like over the last 10 years, 15 years. It's like, oh, here's our shop rate. And then we just start increasing margin a little bit more to compensate for it. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. It's kind of our approach always. We're in a business and we're making money. So what's the problem? But recently I, took a page out of Cody's book and really part of the desire to do this was to be able to demonstrate to a customer if I have to win business. Hey, here's a transparent pricing, because we couldn't do that before. Because it's like, well, it shows I'm making 40% margin, but really that's like, that's 10% net and 25% gross. So we now went ahead and did exactly what Cody's done, and we every every work center is different based on the wage rate of the employee. That includes their health insurance, their 401k. That includes, to Cody's point, like the average number of overtime hours they work, and we go ahead and bake that in. Preventative maintenance, all these different, and even like the way I describe, the easiest way to describe it is we went from quoting at gross margin to quoting it somewhere between gross and net, about halfway down the income statement, if that makes sense. So we're not capturing everything. So now we're quoting it at like 20 to 30%, whereas before we were quoting it like 30 to 40% margin. And so yeah, that's kind of how we do it. Cody was super helpful in that, and learning his approach to it, and it was the way we honestly probably should have done it all along. But like I said, when you're making money and winning business, you don't really want to mess with it. We were up pretty nervous, and it's like from that point in time, now we can never look at, like, we run a part history and a job cost detail on every single job that comes through our shop. And so we're looking at, management's looking at it, the account manager's looking at it every single time we do that job. We're looking at it. And so now the reason I share that is because now it's like all that data is skewed, because it's now we're costing it differently. So we had a timestamp in time where it's like, okay, but even that, it was like if people clocked into that job before that day had started, it was based on the old rates, and after that it was based on, so it's we're it was an interesting period of time where it's like we're not really able to clearly tell, because it was some crossover between the two. But all in all, it was the right decision. And we have not seen our win rate go down yet. So that was the biggest nervous part about it, is like, hey, let's all of our existing business, we're not going and changing the pricing on them. We're gonna, like, it's been super helpful, because what it was is like the really labor intensive jobs, we realized we're not making any money on it. Like, we may be making a little bit, 10%, but at the end of the day, like, we're not making any net income on it. And so that's what we wanted to do. That's the strategy, which I've talked to Cody about too, is like the more product we can do where we don't have to touch it a lot, is like they can move, part velocity through the shop. Like, that's what we want to be winning. And so how do we win more of that? And we can adjust the margin. What you would do is, you'd make the margin on labor a little bit higher and the margin on material a little bit lower, and so that you can get parts through faster. Now you want to be able to add value, and you want to win work that adds value, and you want to be able to have work for your people. But this is the reasons that we were moving in that direction, so that we can start to bring in work and reward customers where it doesn't have to be a lot of work and it can get in and out of the door. We can give them a lower profit margin, as opposed to everything kind of being the same.
Right, right. And I think analyzing that and having that, that frequent kind of virtuous circle as far as, all right, this is our ideal part, our ideal customer profile, type of work. Obviously, it's a bell curve. You're going to have because everybody has a variety of customers. So it's obviously not the only market you serve, and in fact, diversification is a huge part of being sustainable in this business. So you want to be careful when targeting, but this helps you to build that ideal profile. It's like, all right, this is the sweet spot where we want to hit it. At the same time, I've talked to shops years ago. I remember I visited a shop where I may have told this story before, but there's this massive automated folder with robots and unloading and loading, and they were flexible robots, and they dedicated some production to it, and then they also had some manual load and unload to it. It was an amazing machine, and so they shoved everything to that machine because that machine could produce this with virtually no labor and very quickly. High machine rate, obviously, because they had to pay back the machine, but the cost worked out where it was so quick for every job. Problem is they shoved everything there. They reduced their, so we have press brake capacity that is underutilized, but yet you're still paying these press brake operators. You didn't lay them off. You still have to pay their checks, and they are not producing as much as they used to because you shifted all that work to the automated folder, and because in cost accounting that worked better when bidding. Saying, all right, it has to go through that work center because if you go through the press brakes, that's a lot more labor, and yet overall shop throughput was going down because your existing labor, they were quoting as if they could hire and fire at will. It's like, hey,
Right.
you're still paying everybody. Everybody's still on the payroll. You can't sustain a business if you're just going to hire people per job. You can't quote jobs as if you're going to hire labor per job, or excuse me, it's not necessarily quote, but schedule. So the quoting didn't change, but the scheduling did. And
Well, the
so,
quoting can change though too, because if you're going to quote it, you can quote it. That can be an argument. We have that debate. It's like, how do you quote it for lights out? And then what if you don't run it lights out? You know what I'm saying? Because there's jobs where it's like, so what we'll do is like shift some of the time to material handling, because it's going to be more material handling if they come in and they're running it lights out versus while the machine's running, they're taking the parts out. So there is a
right.
different way to quote it too. That's a tricky thing. And the new thing that's really interesting, and we don't have a machine that does this yet, but how I've wrestled with in my mind is how to quote parts that take it's like the one piece flow, some of the punch presses where it takes the part off and stacks it. Right. So that's laser time or punch time. That's your highest cost driver time in all of the shop. And that's machine time, but it's actually doing a material handling process. So how do you quote that now? Right. Like, think about that. It's like, if it's saving you time on the material handling side, and it's machine up, but it's machine up time. So it's a tricky thing. That's a new dynamic that we're seeing in the industry that I don't have it solved for in my head yet. But
Lance,
because to
does
your point, it all goes hand in hand too. But Tim, like the scheduling, because how you quote it is how you schedule it, how it's going to flow through the shop. So if you don't have laser runtime, and there's different ways you can do that, depending on your ERP system, but that's how you're scheduling it also. So you can't just say, oh, it's only going to take, because I'm running it lights out, I'm only going to put 2 hours of laser runtime on it. Well, really, it's going to take 10. You're just going to run it lights out. Sorry, go ahead,
right?
Cody.
Do you have a piece of equipment that does that like automated stacking?
No, sir, not on a cutting
Okay.
machine.
Well, the only reason I was just curious because that that I've never even thought about that. I was curious too of your thought, like, with any type of automation, you guys certainly have a lot more than we do. Um, do you, like, for example, like, I know you guys have the automated or the robotic press brake, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know it's probably a separate work center rate, but I guess my question is this: do you quote the work as if you're going to run it manually on a press brake with an operator, and then if it lends itself to that piece of equipment, you move it to it and just keep the efficiency, gain in your back pocket without giving it to your customer at quoting?
Depends, both ways. So if we know we're going to run it on a bin cell, we quote it on the bin cell. I think we strategically had that rate be the same. I'm like looking it up as we talk. Be the same as, even though it should be more, as a traditional brake press, because we were wanting to get more work for it.
Yeah.
And you don't have the labor side of it, right? So yes, the machine costs more, but you don't have the labor on it.
Yep.
So I think we ended up using the same rate. In fact, I'm sure we did. And that was our way to win more business, is like, is to do it that way. The other thing we'll do is like on if we know we're going to run something lights out on the laser or punch, we'll pad more offloading time and make the runtime, but then that screws up your scheduling, right? So it's a tricky thing to do. Granted, there is ways, and you can manipulate that in your ERP system to make it work, but ours is a little antiquated in that regard. So
We have a software topic coming up in our publications that deals with this challenge of production scheduling and automation, and also basically mirroring the kind of a theory of constraints tied to it. The argument in job shops in general and theory of constraints is, all right, well, your constraint's going to move around depending on your mix of work on the floor, and that's true to some degree. But then once you reduce that WIP, and you reduce it to the point where you are streamlining and your part velocity, where, all right, now you only have a day or a few hours worth of WIP, and you're starting to run on the edge. And then, all right, now you only have one or two areas where, all right, this is usually our constraint process, usually in powder coating, masking, like the masking station in front of powder coating, perhaps, or you've got a heat treat, or a baking oven, or you've got welding. Sometimes it's forming. And so it just depends. But you reduce that, and then you've got it to the point where, all right, now keep that at maximum capacity, 80%, so I can absorb the availability. And then just, all right, this is what I want to work on next. And so that's all a long way of saying this all ties into costing, and the fact that, and again, I was talking to Jason earlier at Paperless, where they said, all right, their customer base, it's a full range of granular activity-based costing versus just using basically that bid-win ratio as a guide, saying, hey, this is the price that market will bear. Do my costs match that? The costs match that, we're good. All right, that's a good price, because the market's going to dictate the price,
Right.
and kind of go from there. So anyway, but regarding production scheduling, has it been an issue for you guys in the last last few months? Because you have had unprecedented amounts of work. Lance, you mentioned you were just catching up now. So kind of bring me through your journey about catching up, and kind of pains in scheduling there, which obviously again affects those costs, because then you got overtime, you got all these other unexpected attributes that pop up.
yeah, I mean, our shop is different from most. We run where we're always working overtime, and so we run a lean crew. We let people work as, we have a flex shift where you can come in as early as you want and stay as late as you want, as long as you have the work. So we're pretty unique in that, and that does hurt margin, but it also, the cost of hiring is a very big number, that is a soft number that most people don't realize, and also the cost of quality and impacts of turnover. But as it relates to scheduling, yeah, this has been our biggest pain point. Our scheduling software works decent, or I'd say good, until you're behind, and then it's totally broken. And maybe that's the case with every software. But I've been looking into, all the things you're talking about. I think the what is it, the drum, I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, well, it's drum buffer rope, where
Drum buffer
you've got,
up, yeah,
yeah,
all these
where
things, yeah.
where
And
have you got?
so I've been studying all that stuff too. It's fascinating. But to your point, that's the tricky part with the job shop. It's like, well, the constraint is always moving, right? It's like, well, it's laser this week, but I think you can bake that in to where, you decide what it is, and then the constraint is established, and so it's you're filling the drum based on that. So like, call it laser, and like that's always what it is, and you control the rest of the flow through that, right? Is that kind of the thought there, Tim?
Well, yeah. I mean, a thought with it is usually when I see at least the readers I've covered. Again, this is just from my reporting, but I go and visit the shop. In fact, there was a shop in Texas that implemented theory of constraints, where they just basically stopped releasing orders to the floor until WIP was down to a manageable level in front of what they had identified as their constraint processes, and then they basically scheduled around that, as far as, all right, what is in most danger of being late according to, capacity and standard run times we have, and then they would dial in their run times depending on the part mix. It's a challenging it's a challenging conundrum for sure, because you have to work in automation, you have to work in also what the market will bear, which is interesting too, because now we have unprecedented demands, with AI, and so that's really driving more interest in the market, more investors in the market. Again, as I've mentioned before on this podcast, I get calls from investors all the time saying, "Hey, teach me about this industry, because this industry is very, very interesting to me, because it's hard, AI, they're all moving away from accounting, which they think will be destroyed by AI or actually totally replaced by AI. And they see metal fab and other kind of high mix manufacturing operations going, hey, this this is pretty
Yeah.
sustainable. This
I've
is a
been
good
saying that. I'm like,
business.
man, I'm glad I'm not a service provider and we're in metal fabricating, man. My grandfather's foresight of that was just golden, because all AI can do is improve our business. And by the way, it's driving a lot of what we're doing because of all the data center stuff. But yeah, to finalize that, so we've been building Sky Planner, which is, I may have even gotten the idea from you, Tim. But it's I remember you mentioning some modular scheduling software you can build, and it does have AI built into it. And so I think I just talked to the guy today, and I think we're gonna release it in the next week or two. So we'll see, man. It's gonna be I'm very nervous, because when you make a switch, I've been having them just compare the two systems. What I asked them to do is like have it mirror the scheduling that we currently have, while also removing the issues that we have with that scheduling, specifically that queue times are viewed as a block that had to be put on the beginning and the end of a runtime. And so what that does is then make sure the block that has to be scheduled that much bigger. And so we've now set it up to where it's elapsed times. And then the recalculation method of once somebody's clocked into a job, which hoses up our system all the time, using the original planned runtime, because it all kind of washes out at the end. One may go over a little bit, one may go under, but what we have an issue with is when it recalculates it in our current system, it'll kick it way out, and that throws off everything. And so we're really excited to try releasing Sky Planner, and we'll see how it goes. But it's been fun digging into drum buffer rope and all these, the theory of constraints and all these things I've been reading a lot about. And we kind of end up somewhere kind of in the middle. It's, um, if there's a gambit of like, the old school in that way, so we're kind of down, closer to the newer school, but not all the way over there. um
Gotcha.
yeah, I was running through chat gpt like comparisons of our model versus different things, and how it fits in, and it was really interesting to read through.
Awesome. And Cody, just kind of bring me through the story of your catch up in the last a few months, as far as trying to catch up, and do you have similar scheduling problems?
No, we've got it pretty much all figured out. It's pretty much the end of that.
Of course,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how it is.
Next question. So yeah, I mean, it's scheduling's by far one of the biggest challenges we have here, and some of it's attributed to the fact that we've got this new ERP system. Gives us a lot of good information. We're not mature enough at living in that system yet, I guess I would say, to understand the best way to utilize it. And so we keep trying to iterate upon that, the last couple years to make it better service us and make decisions for scheduling. At its foundation for Plex, probably much like any other ERP system from a scheduling standpoint, it considers a couple factors to backwards schedule from. So, for example, if you have a weldment with, four different manufactured components in it that we would make, it's basically just taking all those different processes steps and applying two pieces of information. One, what's the standard rate for that, whether it's laser time, form time, etc. And then we kind of allocate a dedicated or a standardized, what do we call it, delay time. Basically just means I don't care how complex this part is or how long it takes to run. If it's going to hit a press break, give it 2 days. And then or if it's gonna go through weld, give it 2 days. And then, if it's a weldment that takes 12 hours, consider that as well. And so what that does is it allows us to say, hey, we've got all these jobs that start with a laser operation. It tells us that you need to start it by this date. It needs to be out of the laser by this date. And so theoretically, you're just trying to not have any late jobs in that area, just like anybody else. The challenge has been with this new work that we've brought on is it's extremely value add. So I mean, it's just a lot of weld. We've more than doubled our amount of welders that we have in our facility. I think we're up to 18 now, and
Wow.
that's welding is by far the most complex thing we do. And it's not to say that all the weldments that we've brought on in the last couple months are just like absolute beasts, but they're a mixture of some of them are absolute beasts and some of them are just very high volume. And so, it's really kind of reinforced how important it is to do your diligence up front to make sure you've got the right fixtures and the right processes and things documented. Um, we've really tested ourselves on that front in the last couple months. And so you kind of say, okay, here's how it was quoted, right? And in a perfect world, that's exactly how it's going to go on the floor, and then you can schedule accordingly. But you get efficiency gains. People get more familiar with the parts. You iterate upon processes and fixtures and things like that. And you also have things bite you in the butt that didn't work out. Even though we've ran 4 or 5 production runs of this part, something's tweaked or it's not coming out as consistent as we like. So you go back to the drawing board. That slows the process down, et cetera, et cetera. Sprinkle a bunch of new people on top of that. Um, it just is ripe for chaos. And so we've really kind of started to go back to like, really just making sure we've got the right people. We've made some strategic hires. We're actually in the process of doing it on some key roles that we haven't had here at Everyday, either ever or lately, because it's just about having those systems and processes and ability to audit those things and et cetera to make sure that you've got repeatable processes being followed out there. But ultimately, to circle back, I guess, of what that's done to us from a scheduling perspective is it's just, you know, you send a part out to our shop that goes laser form paint, it flies through the plant. Right now, because we have a tremendous backlog at weld, it might be a relatively simple weldment, but it's got to get in line. So there's all these things you're balancing, like, is it a strategic customer? Um, are we late on the part? What's what's driving the decision making at this time? And so, that kind of, when you get behind enough, and I don't know if you can attest to this too, Lance, but you can kind of take hey, this is how we schedule, and then you start hearing from customers, and that can kind of derail that typical process, right? Um, and so the best answer to that is just get on time. So
Yeah.
there's all kinds of things that we do week in and week out, and in manufacturing, you're always throwing curveballs. Piece of equipment goes down, people don't show up, all those normal things. So we definitely do not have it figured out, but we're trying to iterate and become more predictable on things, and it's just a journey that we'll be on for probably some time.
And all the more reason why you schedule. I had a customer out here last week. They've been pushing this like, hey, they're like basically like, we'll pay you anything we can, anything you want to get this done by the end of the month. Which is like, by the way, they waited way too long to order it, and the whole reason we're in this position is totally and completely because of them.
Yeah.
But they're like, so why do you guys have so many late jobs in each department? And we actually are. Our schedule is set up to be the capacity is less than what we are actually working. So even though, almost everyone in our company works at least 50 hours, we're only scheduling it to 40, every worker is 40 hours. And so we're always looking like we're further behind than we are, right? But that's the right approach. We used to schedule it based on like what the average of everybody was working. And like you can never get caught up like that. Whereas now it's like, it looks like you're further behind. So it's kind of defeating at times because it's like, oh, there's all these late jobs. But we've kind of said it's like, okay, as long as we have, ideally 15% or less jobs tracking late, then we're in really good shape. 20 is kind of okay. Anything beyond that is not okay. But because we know we're working 15 to 20% more actually than our schedule has allows for. The next stage is like we live in this world, and bringing it back to quoting full circle, everybody thanks to Amazon and everybody wants to be able to pay extra for everything right now. And so this is what we're solving for, is like, how do you, and you know, Caleb talks a lot about this too, is like, how do you have this extra capacity? How do you build in extra capacity so that, I mean, I could have charged them $50,000 and if I had the extra capacity and gotten that done, you know, and had 50 grand extra in my pocket, you know what I mean? Or in our company pocket. And so, but how do you, how do you, so that's what we're solving for right now. And really the key is being able to get the scheduling as dialed in as possible so that you can build in that extra capacity of scheduling on top of what you already had to have built in. And then, and have like a tiger team that can take those jobs on. So, you know, we've never taken expedite fees. We've always just said, hey, we'll do the best we can to, you know, accomplish whatever every customer wants. We didn't want to give the impression of people being able to pay to cut in line. I think we always thought that sent the wrong message and was short-sighted in business. But the reality is that's what everybody wants. And so we have to listen to our customers. And so that's our biggest thing that we're solving for this year, is like, how can we figure out how to take expedite fees, and plan and schedule for that? Because if that's what our customers want, regardless of what message we think it sends, right or wrong, that's what they want. And that's what we need to give them.
Have you thought about having like a dedicated cell in your area? We don't do this, but I've heard people do this, like a dedicated cell, like, you know, whether it be, you know, I don't know if you're gonna have a dedicated laser to it, but maybe a dedicated press brake and a weld booth and whatever it is that says, you know, this, we don't put any of our normal work on this. This is just for these hot shot, like expedite type of things. That's, you know, maybe it sits half the time doing nothing, but you're charging out the butt for it when you use it.
Yeah, we haven't thought about it that regard because of just floor space, but what we're planning is a second shift that can serve as the tiger team, that you schedule it for second shift. So that's kind of how we're solving for it.
Okay.
Man, we've been digging deep into the weeds for the past hour. This is fabulous.
Yeah.
Kind of my big takeaways, and Lance, you mentioned it, which was you have a variable. There's a very good variable where you have flexible work hours and kind of people first policies. Where, hey, you got this. These are the policies you put in place to attract the tiger team, the best team you can, because that's what's going to make the difference at the end of the day. And so that moves on to, okay, now we have to have this symbiotic relationship between costing, scheduling, and estimating. And estimating lies in the center of it all, because estimating is listening to that customer base. So anyway, I'll stop blathering. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you all next time.
The Next-Gen Metal Fab podcast is a production of Fabricators and Manufacturers Association and part of the FMA Podcast Network. The show is hosted by Tim Heston and Caleb Chamberlain. The podcast is produced and edited by Garrett Slager and Dana Weicker. Additional production support by Dan Davis, Andy Flando, Mike Owens, Billy Culpa, Elizabeth Gavin, and me, Sarah Spring. Thank you for listening.